Welcome to Two Homes. This podcast explores the relationship between our inner world and the systems we live within, from our bodies and beliefs to the businesses, destinations, and environments we shape. Because sustainability that isn't embodied doesn't last, and well-being that stays at the surface level doesn't change much at all. Together, we'll explore what it really takes to build systems that support people, places, and the planet over the long term. From leadership and organizational culture to the hidden patterns that shape how we live, work, and travel. This is an invitation to look a little deeper and to discover how meaningful change often starts closer to home than we think. Hi, welcome to Two Homes. I'm your host, Sarah, and I am getting used to the rhythm of podcasting. So even though it's now episode 6, which is very exciting, it was only last week that I had the official launch and the podcast went live. So I'm feeling a little bit extra excited to think that it's actually out in the world after a lot of preparation. And yeah, it's weird to be talking about that, I guess, at episode 6, but here we are. So thanks for being here. If you're brand new or if you've been listening since the beginning, it is really fantastic. And I must say, like, one of the most commonly asked questions so far has been, will I be having guests? And the answer to that is yes, there will be guests coming into the podcast in the future. And for the moment, we will continue, building up a base of different discussions in these solo episodes. And I am also super excited to be welcoming guests to come and talk about expert specialist topics that we'll dive into as we go forward as well. So thanks for being here. I think I said that already. Without any further ado, let's dive into today's episode. Now, today's episode is about the certification trap. And before we get all upset about certification or that maybe it's not all it's cracked up to be, I'm going to preface this by saying I do work on certifications as well. So I have been working across different certifications, even in the earlier days of Plastic-Free Southeast Asia. We created our own plastic-free standard, and a couple of venues in Siem Reap achieved that, which is really cool. I haven't used that with any clients in a while. That's not to say that I wouldn't. It's an excellent framework, and that's what all of these certifications are. They're voluntary frameworks. So I've also worked very closely on implementing a Blue Standard plastic-free certification, which is a standard run by Oceanic Global. And this particular one was on no single-use plastic, so that was amazing. And it was extremely thorough as well. And so that's what I really like to see. Sometimes certifications are pitched against each other, but not all certifications are the same. So it really does pay to look behind and see what's actually required, and not just is it easy to attain, but is it credible. With that particular one, we worked with one hotel, and as is my general approach with working with clients, we did a lot of behind the scenes work. Now, this was a huge hotel, massive number of rooms, very luxury, multiple outlets. So that's like food and beverage. I think something like 5 restaurants, a couple of bars, all of the stuff. So it was quite extensive. And I also spent a lot of time with their procurement manager, looking in their storerooms, like seeing, what are they using, and what could potentially be changed, but not just what could be changed, but getting that procurement manager to be part of the solution. You may be detecting a theme if you've been here for a couple of episodes already, but really my work is about working with people. We can have a certification, we can have a policy, we can have a boss that says you must do this, this, and this, but where it often doesn't quite meet the mark is if the people aren't involved. So I'm really, probably going to go on about that quite a bit. So working with the people. So we did that. I think I was on site for about a week. And we had a lot of conversations. We looked at things, we looked at behind the scenes, we looked through the garbage. We set up some systems for them to measure the waste as well and categorize it. And so after that initial engagement, and of course we spent a couple of days in meeting rooms, really like with the core leadership team working together to come up with a plan. I then, along with the team from Oceanic Global, helped them when we met periodically. It might not have been every month, though that is my preference, just because a month is a long time when it comes to changing how things are done. And so if you leave it too long, it can go sideways. However, on this occasion, we met very consistently right down to the last bit of plastic was gone, and it was amazing. Some of the other things, and this I always find interesting, is that whilst my company is called Plastic Free Southeast Asia, whilst single-use plastics are a huge part of the information and the workshops and that kind of thing that we do, it always goes beyond that. It is much more about wider sustainability, but plastic is something that's quite a tangible, visible, constructive starting point for a lot of companies. Some of the other wins from that work were the French chef who oversaw the food and beverage actually started to add more plant-based options onto their menu. That was pretty cool. And I'm always impressed to see these kind of changes. So sometimes there can be a bit of resistance. I think that more and more people are understanding that vegetarian and plant-based options are appealing. Seeing that transition come through as almost like a bonus, that was pretty cool. Unfortunately, not long after we completed this task, the GM changed hotels. And then not long after that, COVID hit. So a lot of that work actually regressed. I met with the new GM post-COVID, and a lot of plastic had crept back in. And it's a bit of a shame that so much energy and investment was made before that, but that it wasn't reinvested. It wasn't picked up with the same enthusiasm after COVID. I don't know how things are now at that particular hotel. It's been a little while since I've been in touch, and I do sincerely hope that they're better. And I'm sure some of those foundational things stayed in place. You know, they took out this little shampoo and conditioner bottles and things like that. I'm sure that they're still running with the aluminium ones that they changed to. Like, there would definitely be some, but it's a shame that we lost such a lot of work across a lot of different places with COVID. And I also see this continually pop up when the manager leaves or when the sustainability lead leaves. Okay, so that's enough about Oceanic Global. I've also trained in GSTC Hotel Operations Certification. So GSTC is the Global Sustainable Tourism Council. And at the time of this recording, they're currently having a conference, and it would have been fantastic to be there. Unfortunately, I couldn't this time around, but it was only just over a year ago that I attended the training, which was a 3-day deep dive into their standard and what's required. And I was so impressed by the breadth and the holistic nature of their standard. That included things like sense of place. Like, can you tell where you are when you're staying in a hotel, or could you be in any hotel in any country, in any place in the world? That one really impacted me. There was a lot of stuff around noise and light pollution that was really impactful, especially as a lot of luxury hotels are in very sensitive landscapes. And it's wonderful to see that there's certification schemes that take that really seriously. This one in particular, and I actually just received an email in the last week with some new updates. So they are making updates. They are continuing to stay not just relevant, but like helping people go that little bit further, helping hotels go that little bit further, because there is this sort of continual improvement built in, one for the hotels that are going for it, but also in the sense that the certification evolves. It's not stagnant. And that, that's really important, because as the landscape of sustainability changes, as better solutions become available, as things evolve, it makes sense to bring them in. And if I think back to that framework that we developed at Plastic Free Southeast Asia, at the inception of that, there were much fewer single-use plastic alternatives than there are today. So, that needs to be updated and kept current to also help hotels achieve the certification. However, I've got to admit, last year when I was traveling for a tourism conference, I came across a GSTC certification displayed on the outside of the elevator, waiting for the elevator to go to my room. And I believe it was actually on booking.com as well. One of the reasons why I chose that particular hotel. However, what I saw when I got there wasn't anything that I felt matched what I know the standard of that certification to mean. And so that was a little bit disappointing. A few of the things I saw straight up in the lobby, there were like cup noodles and Pringle type chips and things like that for sale. So these were, not anything particularly local, thinking of that sense of place, but they're also single wrap plastic. And that's definitely something that is not really looked upon favorably in the certification. So that already had me a little bit like, okay, what's going on here? Furthermore, when I checked into my room, there was a mountain of single-use, single and individually wrapped amenities, multiple toothbrushes. I just scooped them all up, and there was a lot of cupboards. I put them in the cupboard. I bring my own toiletries when I travel anyway, to minimize not just the packaging and the waste, but also I am mindful of the kind of chemicals that I use on my body. And in that sense, I try not to use chemicals that are dangerous and harmful. So I prefer to travel with my own. So I put them out of my way so that I could just have all of my own things out. And if you've listened to episode 5, the first night I stay in a hotel, I give them a chance to show me, like, are they following I've hung up my towels, I don't need my linen changed. And the very next day, there was a whole new mountain of amenities and my towels were changed. And so part of the GSTC certification as well is ongoing training, and is being able to show that you've done training with the staff and that these things are actually happening in practice. So on this occasion, it wasn't. I did a reel on my stay there. So if you are interested, it's up on Instagram at Plastic Free C with 2 A's, SEAA. And feel free to check it out. And that's a little bit more of a deep dive of what I observed when I was there. I don't think I mentioned the certification. It was more just looking at the layout of the room. But yeah, an interesting little snapshot all the same. Of course, I know the team at GSTC, so I reached out and I've let them know that I thought that it was a little bit of a mismatch. I am not sure what has happened since then. So to be continued. This hotel being in Bangkok, maybe you're listening and you're in another city. Maybe you're in Sydney, maybe you're in Phnom Penh, maybe you're in KL. And you might think, oh, well, that's just relevant to Bangkok. Bangkok aren't very good at this. Well, I've seen a lot of this over the years, and there is a bit of a bias that comes up. We want to be doing our best as people, as the humans that we are, because we are all humans in this industry. We want to be doing our best, and we don't want to be associated with someone or somewhere perhaps that isn't doing such a good job. So I challenge you to try not to dismiss it straight off the bat, because there are flavors of this. I see so many commonalities no matter where I work, in Australia, in Asia, wherever I work. I come up against these kind of things over and over again. I'm going to dive into this more in the next episode, but in NIA, which is a movement practice that I follow and teach, we talk about the beginner's mindset. So we also talk about this in Buddhism. I encourage you to have a beginner's mind, to think about how might you be able to learn something from this? How might this apply to you? Even if I'm using examples that aren't in your city or in your industry even. These are things that go across industries. In the very early days of plastic-free Southeast Asia, when we were predominantly doing workshops in Cambodia, I would do a workshop in Siem Reap, and there was a particularly profound video of water pollution that we'd use, and it was close to Phnom Penh. And the people in Siem Reap would go, oh, you know, that's Phnom Penh. That's very bad. We wouldn't do that to our river. And then the same video in Phnom Penh would say, oh, well, this is just outside of Phnom Penh. That's very bad. We wouldn't do that. So I'm not saying that they're wrong, and I'm not saying this is limited to Cambodian people. Again, this is a very human thing. It's very important. So with that, like with all of the workshops that I do and have done throughout Southeast Asia, I will always adapt the content to be as localized as possible, because until we can put ourselves in the picture, it's really hard for us to connect with the problem. So thinking about how some of these things might show up in your hotel, in your neighborhood, in your own home even, will help you to look at them with an idea of, or a mindset of, what could I do differently? How could I approach this? And that is my invitation to you. Okay, so I've talked about a few different certifications, and I've also explained where a few things have gone wrong. The pattern that keeps showing up, I think, regardless of which certification it is that it's not been fully embedded. There are, okay, the first situation with COVID, extenuating circumstances, things changed the whole world. Panicked and single use was seen as hygienic and safe. I get that. However, there are other ways we can be hygienic and safe. So we're now in a very post-COVID era. Yes, hygiene has always been and will continue to be important in hotels. So that aside, we're talking about the certifications in general, the things that occurred in the two examples I shared. One was the general manager moved hotels, and the general manager who took over approached things differently. So one is that how do we integrate it into the system so that if management changes, the systems are able to hold. The second one was that it was a group certification. So perhaps that hotel hadn't been audited yet. And this is the case with some certification schemes. If it's in a group sense, or I previously worked on certifications for GECA, and we did a lot of waste management, waste collection services, and they would have dozens, sometimes hundreds of collection sites. So it wasn't feasible to audit every single one. Instead, they were done on a rotation over the duration of the certificate. So maybe no one has checked. I would be hesitant to say that group certifications can be effective. Something I also notice is that often when I've worked remotely, or done pre-work, I should say, with hotels that are overseas or in a different location to where I live, before I go, we do a remote audit. And I have found that there tends to be something a little bit different on that remote audit as to what I actually see when I go there. It's an interesting challenge to say, I'm not going to judge or say anyone's doing a bad job. We have to look, these audits have to take place so we get a sense of where things are at. It's not good or bad, it just is. And we need to know that actual factual baseline, because without that baseline, then we don't know where we're going, or we don't know what improvement looks like. So that's super important. And it's really hard if the baseline is on paper saying things that are a lot better than what they are in reality. There's also this cycle that I see, and I remember meeting someone from a hotel in KL. She was either HR or comms or something, and she'd been handed their EarthCheck recertification. that was due 3 months later. And so when I reached out, because I was staying in the hotel, she, grabbed the opportunity to have coffee with me, and was wondering what on earth to do. And I was really pragmatic with her. And again, I don't know the outcome to this story, but I was really pragmatic with her. And I said, I think you need more time than 3 months, because one, she'd never done any work in sustainability. Two, it was sitting all on her shoulders once again. And three months is an incredibly short amount of time. But this is what I see time and again. I recently reached out to a prospect in Sydney, and they had just recertified for their B Corp, and then they're like, yeah, okay, this isn't a priority for us. So I can see already this is going to play out, that a few months before their recertification, suddenly it will become a priority, and it will be panic stations, and everything will be needing to be flurried and organized to make sure that they're ready for the audit or the submission or what have you, and then things fall back to the day-to-day system. So this is something that I've seen over and over again. Whatever it might be, whether it's GSTC, whether it's B Corp, or local programs like I've worked on with Better Business Partnerships that operate here in Sydney, where I'm based, the same thing has come up time and again. And it is checking in after a year or 2 years or whatever the certification period is, a bit of a, oh, we haven't really looked at this. Oops, I guess we better look at this. And then stepping into action, getting it all moving, making some plans, but then shelving it again for another 12 months or 2 years or what have you. This looks like passing to keep the certificate. It looks like the certificate is the main driver. The thing about how sustainability sits at the moment is that it is an add-on. It only becomes important when it's urgent, and most of the time it's not urgent. It is trying to add this extra thing in the mix, as my example with the HR or comms person picking it up. And I see this sort of hot potato often go to people who are passionate about sustainability, but they don't know how to do it. And because they don't know how to do it, it takes longer, and then it may be seen as a failure. And it's really unfair. It's unfair on every person in every part of that it is being held like this, that it is rarely important, though sometimes urgent, when people are busy. And I would say that in big cities, I definitely notice this in big cities, but big Western cities more so, that busyness is a cultural condition, and so much is running such a fine line to look productive, to be productive, to constantly be in motion, that it's not a surprise that this falls away until it's actually urgent. And then it's only actually urgent with those properties that have opted in for these certifications. It's still very voluntary to certify for sustainability. It's great that they're opting in. I think that's an amazing step, but it's not the only step. When we're working on these cycles of just getting ready for an audit or just getting ready for a certification and handing that job to one person who may or may not work in that space on a regular basis, or handing it to a small committee who are only given a small amount of time allocation to work on that, it can be quite frustrating. It can mean that sustainability is done enough to get the certification or to pass the audit, but that there is a big relaxing after that point, that it's not embedded, that it's not something known widely across the company, that there are only a select few that really know what's going on. This may also look like one ESG lead or one person in a small team looking after entire portfolios. And I think that would very much reflect what I saw with that hotel in Bangkok with the group certification. But how does that filter down to each individual hotel with their different operating teams? How is that measured and reported back? How is the engagement? How is it possible for one person to manage such a large and broad array of complex cultures within cultures. And earlier on in episode 4, we talked about sustainability burnout and that concentrated responsibility in depth. And this is definitely reflected in this certification cycle, and it does feed this pattern. It is not a priority until certification becomes due. Some companies don't even have sustainability people, or they do and they're spread so thin that they're just working on the next report, the next thing, the next urgent deadline on a bit of a treadmill. So this isn't the fault of those individuals who are working so hard, and this isn't the fault of the certification scheme. The schemes and the standards are designed to reach the goal, but there's a systemic issue there that makes this cycle almost inevitable. I see as well when I'm working with different companies that my stance is for a minimum that we check in once a month, and sometimes there's a bit of pushback to that, or other deliverables like internal meetings and conversations, such as having 5 minutes of sustainability on the weekly agenda. There'll be a bit of a push that, like, oh, every week. But the thing is, the longer we push it out, the worse these cycles become, the worse the troughs are between acting actually sustainable. So when we bring those timelines closer together, then we start to see more consistency and more focus and less heaviness, less reliance on just the certificate and just the one person to carry it through. How do we balance this? I know that there's training requirements built into some of these certification schemes, but what I also notice when I'm looking at how big group hotels are advertising their sustainability initiatives on their websites is that there will often be a number of areas of sustainability, and it will be met by saying, well, this hotel has the organic garden. This hotel has minimized food waste. This hotel has solar panels, but there's rarely consistency across the entire group. And I think that that is also one of the traps, perhaps, of group certification, is that maybe there's training at a high level, but is that reaching the operational level? Is that reaching the individual properties in a meaningful way? If we want to get the most out of certification, to get the full benefit that it is designed to deliver, to have continuous improvement, not just paying for the renewal and being on the books and reaching that minimum, passing the audit, I go back to this idea of embedding sustainability at every level, at every level. There are people in every department of a hotel that have valuable ideas and insights if they're just given the opportunity to be part of the conversation. And not just once, but regularly. And not in a way that makes it arduous or burdensome, but in a way that actually makes things lighter overall and make them more engaging, because it doesn't have to be a standalone. It doesn't have to be a massive reinvention of things. It simply can be bringing it into more broad conversations and touching on it regularly. And the more regularly you touch on it, the more normalized it's going to become. And I think I said this in one of my earlier episodes, that if it is not part of the system, then it will feel really hard and heavy and big. But if it becomes normalized, then actually it becomes something that the whole company carry together. So when just passing and the emphasis and urgency being only on the renewal process, or the renewal stage of certification, there are a number of different costs that we see. One is like the cost. It costs a significant amount of time, energy, and money to participate in certifications. And it is money well spent, don't get me wrong. But if your certification is not demonstrated in the day-to-day, if, like my situation in this hotel last year in Bangkok, they've paid to be part of a certification scheme, but they're not actually doing what the certificate says, then they're going to potentially lose customers like me. There is going to be a dilution of the value of people see of these certificates. They'll be like, oh yeah, good-o. And I've also seen on occasion people in businesses use the certificate as a shield against doing anything more. And that came up with an earth check certificate years and years and years ago. And it was a venue in Adelaide, and I knew someone working there, and I knew someone who'd been there for an event, and they'd said to me, Sarah, they've got single-use cups. What is going on? So I reached out to my contact and I'm like, hey, someone's just told me that you're using single-use cups. And they said, yeah, but we've got earth check, so it's okay. And it's like, well, is it okay? I really think that there's a lot of missed opportunity. There's a lot of stopping at the minimum. And this is largely because most people in a company don't know what the certification stands for, what it means, what it requires, because it's a little bit hidden. And so I really will just keep coming back to emphasizing that embedding it across all layers so all people understand, give it a lot more power and give it the strength that it should have, because these frameworks are fantastic. But if we treat them as a game to try and achieve, then it's kind of like cheating in an exam. And then the cost of that can be actual financial cost, it can be loss of customers, it can be loss of faith of staff members, of seeing this disconnect, but maybe not having an avenue to talk about it, or being told that it's not important. So, there's a lot of potential fallout in just trying to pass the exam. And across the industry, I think there's another big opportunity that we might be missing, and that is competition. In competition with neighboring or competing brands and hotels, it may fall that, like, well, if they've got that certificate, we'll get this certificate, or we want that certificate too, but we'll get the higher level of the certificate. What if, this is probably a little radical here, what if we worked together? What if we worked with our competitors? What if we shared what worked and what didn't work? And what if we lifted the entire industry up? The tourism industry relies on the environment. People travel to see beautiful, pristine environments. And it's tricky in places like Australia where everything looks clean on the surface, but there's a whole lot under the surface that's invisible. And we have a duty to ensure that we're doing the right thing, that we're not just sweeping it under the carpet where it can't be seen, but that we're actually taking care of this very destination that we are promoting, that we're using, that we are drawing income, visitors, guests from. If we want to continue doing that into the future, then it makes sense that we protect the very environment on which it's built. There's more focus on this. We're seeing it from Tourism Australia, and we're seeing it across state tourism boards in Australia and throughout the world. So where this has worked well, I've worked with small businesses before where we did gather competitors in the room, and instead of reinventing the wheel from the get-go, people were able to share ideas. What had worked well, what didn't work well, what might be a good suggestion for someone else to try. And it also brings a degree of we're in this together. into the picture, which is so important. When you listen to some of my other episodes, perhaps about burnout and so on and so forth, largely sustainability people are working in silos. So, one, we need to reduce those silos in the company itself, but perhaps as peers, as those trying to actually move things into a more sustainable direction, perhaps there could be some peer-to-peer contact there as well. Just a thought. Just because we've always done something one way doesn't mean we can't try something new and different. So, where I'm willing to work with clients on certification, very much like that Oceanic Global example, with engagement, with training, with meetings, with accountability, with helping their company in the long term embed sustainability so that I can step away, so that the GM can change without things going awry. This is fantastic. And then where I've seen certification done well is where the certification is more of an add-on to a culture that's already built around sustainability, to a hotel that's already sustainable from set up to conversation, back of house, front of house, etc. And then having a certification is really just a cherry on top. Certification should be the recognition of sustainability you already live, not the proof of sustainability you're performing. I've used this example before, but like one hotel in particular in Cambodia, this is very much how they operate. They've got their certification. They continue to be recognized and re-achieve certification time and again because it's embedded. It's not a big, urgent, stressful endeavor. Each time they renew, it is more of a sense checking, more of a like, well, this is what we've done. And then the auditor verifying that, maybe making suggestions where they could tweak. I don't know. I wasn't there. But recognizing who they are for what they do because it's already part of their operational day to day, not because they've done it in order to pass the audit. Okay, so if you're a GM or hotel manager and you've got 6 months from now until your next recertification or audit, what I would say to you is if you haven't already started, start now. And start by talking to your team. Start by looking at the notes that you got from your auditor last time and discuss them together and start working this out now. Don't wait until you're trying to rustle everything together at the last minute. Remember that certification isn't the basis for your sustainability. It is for the recognition of sustainability that you already do day to day. So if you're not doing it day to day, how can you start to bring things into the day to day? And I've given a lot of suggestions throughout the podcast so far. So if this is the first time you're listening, please go back and listen to the earlier episodes. I encourage you to. There's a lot of good advice in there. If you are a solo ESG lead managing certifications across a portfolio, I understand how hard a task you have. So, where are your champions? Where are the easiest ways that you can filter this down to every corner, every person in every property? How are they involved? How can you do that? How can you leverage your wider team, not people in ESG, but people who have influence in the organization that can certification trap. I've seen it over the years, over certifications, over industries. So how do we get out of the trap? And I think it is acting as if almost, hopefully not with the stress of, but acting as if we're having an audit every day. Not just like, oh, it doesn't matter now. We're getting certified next year. But acting as if it's just as important today as it is in a year or 2 years or 3 years when recertification is happening. If you're listening to this and if any part of it has resonated with you, I hope that you recognize that you're not the only one struggling with this, not the only one that is trying to reconcile something that was 10 years ago not as big a priority as it is today. To know that you don't need to have all the answers and that you don't need to prove anything, but that authentic leadership, shared interest, accountability, and a beginner's mind can help you to take your next best step. And a cheeky end note, if anyone from GSTC is listening, I would love to know what happened. I would love to know what happened to that hotel. And yeah, and I really hope that they were able to organize some team training to go that bit deeper to be able to make sure that that certification really shone in what they're doing in the day to day. That is all from me today. I hope that you found this to be insightful and useful. So thank you for tuning in today. This has been Two Homes. I'm your host, Sarah Rhodes. And if you're listening to this, I would be so grateful if you would leave a review wherever you're listening to this podcast to help more people find Two Homes as a way to help them do sustainability in tourism even better. Thank you and bye.